Good morning. A few unfamiliar faces to me here this morning, so welcome you and invite you back anytime you get the opportunity. And if I should know you and I don't, I apologize. I forget people awfully easily. So today we're going to be looking in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, if you'd like to turn there. That'll be our scripture today. And we'll be spending the entirety of our time there for our study today. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. One of the things I was thinking about in getting ready for today's lesson, just kind of the basis for some of what we're going to be looking at, is the levels of understanding we may have of various things and how that applies to our spirituality. You know, whenever you're starting something new, you have to start with the basics. It doesn't matter what the task is. If you're a child learning how to speak, you'll say the things that are easy for your mouth to make, which is why kids sometimes have a funny way of talking. When you're new at a task, like if you're an artist like me, I've been drawing my whole life, so my hand knows what I'm doing before my brain does a lot of times, and I'll just make a stroke and it'll look the way I wanted it to look without really having to try very hard. But if you're picking up a pencil or a crayon or whatever it is for the first time, you're going to make some pretty rough shapes the first few times before your body and your mind are lined up. And then once you get to the next stage, it's something like learning a language, for example. You might know a vocabulary, which is the first thing we learn. You know, mama, dada, food, that kind of thing. Those are the things that we learn first because they're important to us when we're kids. Then we'll learn grammar so we can speak properly and people will understand us clearly. And then when you get to the next stage, you start learning, where did that word come from? What's the original meaning? And what language did we borrow it from, especially if we're speaking English? There isn't a part of our language that we haven't plundered from some other language back in history at one point or another. And then we start getting into kind of theory and principles, and rather than just technical knowledge and the ability to apply it properly. So, with all those stages in mind, one of the things that I would say is children, or maybe newbies at a thing, always need step-by-step instructions, right? When you are starting, this example will mean something to some of you and not to others. A new video game, for example, the first thing they plop you into is the tutorial, so that you will know what buttons do what, so you can live in the world that you're living in this video game. If you're starting, a new skill, if you're learning how to cook, you need to know what the measurements are before you can start measuring them into the bowl to bake your bread or whatever else it is that you're learning how to make. If you are learning how to sew, as I was refreshing myself on last month, you've got to remember how to measure things properly, how to cut things properly, how to make your lines so that your pattern matches what you're trying to put together. And how to, rewind that darn bobbin for the third time after you've messed up. So there are always like new step-by-step things. Now, when you're a veteran at something, you've done something for long enough, you starting with the goal and not with the steps, right? Now, some of you have cooked for long enough in your life that when you are hungry for something, you think of the food and what it's going to taste like, and then you go to the cabinet and grab the ingredients and put it together. Now, when you first started cooking, you probably went, okay, I know what I think I want to make, so I'll get out the cookbook and I'll look at the list. And then I'll go to the store and buy those things so that I can make it the way that it says step by step. And if you're like my mom, for example, you get a hankering for something or you need to throw something together, you go, okay, what have I got? That'll work. And then you somehow magically make it happen and it tastes great on the other side. So veterans kind of have goals or purposes that they set their mind to because the steps are second nature. So beyond that, and at the level where a lot of us never reach, there are experts, right? The top of their field. First-class chefs, the fashion designers who can just whip together a garment without really thinking about it, know how the folds of the fabric are going to lay based on touching the fabric and knowing like how it artists who will see the canvas and see the texture of the canvas and know how to put paint down to make it look the way they want it to look before they even pick up a brush. Those experts have such an understanding of both the step-by-step and the goals that they begin to go beyond and understand the principles on which both of those other things are built. They go to a deeper level. And I think with our spiritual understanding, it is possible for even the most ordinary of us to go beyond both the step-by-step, childish, newbie understanding of what we need to do as Christians, and the veteran part where we get a goal in mind, and just by knowing the step-by-step, we'll get to the goal, to the point where we can all be experts, and we can start to understand the principles upon which our faith is built. And I would say, in fact, that is the goal for all of us. Whether we understand every principle and every deeper nuance of the faith is not important, but there are certain things, like how we conduct ourselves towards each other, or how the gospel has meaning for us and how we apply it to saving souls, that I think we all need to learn to be experts on. And what we're going to look at today in particular is one where Paul had to fight with the Corinthians a lot about. He writes about it in this book, he writes about it in the letter that he references in his other letter, and then he writes about it in 2 Corinthians as well, and that idea is idolatry. So we're going to be looking at this for two different reasons. Number one, to learn the lessons Paul actually wanted to teach, and then to apply the principles that he is using to teach them. All right, so I'm going to teach you how he taught by teaching you the thing he was teaching. And that's the goal today. All right, so let's look first of all at the first few verses of this chapter. We're going to look at the first 11 verses and get the the step-by-step do and don't do instructions part of what we're looking at. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did. And 23,000 men fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now, these things happened to them as an example. They were written for our instruction, upon whom the ends of all the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. So, what we're seeing here in these first few verses are the basis for what Paul is saying. He says, these examples that we have in the past set up instructions. And those instructions are, do not do. Here's what we're avoiding. Here are the consequences if we don't avoid it. He says, don't be idolaters, and don't act immorally. Don't try the Lord. Don't grumble, or bad things will happen to you. This is the most basic understanding of spirituality and our Christian life. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people stop here. It's a convenient place to stop. If you know, do and do not do, then in their minds, that should be sufficient to make sure you never do anything bad and nothing bad ever happens to you, right? Paul says, don't grumble, and then you won't be destroyed by the destroyer. So that's a good place to start. I won't be a grumbler. I'm just going to try and speak truth when it's useful and not complain when I can't do anything. I won't grumble against God and blame him when bad things come my way, which is what is being talked about here. So yes, we understand. Good. I thought I do not, and check off the list and make sure I don't do anything wrong. But says in that last verse we read, take care so that you do not fall. Let he who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. Because Paul is saying, by saying all that, okay, you've got all these basic things down, but that's not enough. Watch what you're doing. Watch your step. Verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And the you here is y'all. That's a plural you. So he's saying collectively, you guys have not been overtaken by any sort of temptation here. God is faithful. You will not allow, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but within the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. You judge what I say. Is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? Is not the bread in which we break a sharing in the body of Christ? Since there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we partake of the one bread. Look at the nation Israel. Are not those who eat the sacrifices sharers in the altar? What do I mean then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No. But I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become sharers of demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the table of the Lord and the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We are not stronger than he, are we? All things are lawful, but not all are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. Then let no one seek his own good, but that of his neighbor. Eat anything that is sold to the meat market without asking questions for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord and all it contains. If one of the unbelievers invites you and you want to go, eat anything that is set before you without asking questions for conscience sake. But if anyone says to you, this is meat sacrificed to idols, do not eat it, for the sake of the one who informed you, and for conscience sake. I mean, not your own conscience, but the other man's. For why is my freedom judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I slandered concerning that for which I gave thanks? So Paul dives into a slightly deeper level here, right? They got the don't be an idolater. Don't do these idolatrous actions. And he says, take care that you think that that's enough. Watch out. Because there's a goal in mind that you as a veteran, you as somebody who's been around long enough, you who's been a Christian for long enough, can understand this deeper goal. He's specifically saying in this passage that idolatry has in it the idea of joining with the one to whom the offering has been given. That was part of their worship to the idols, and was part of the worship that he says even was partook in. They both took up in the temple. When there was a sacrifice that was made, if you ate the meat, you were saying, I agree with what's going on here. This is my God. This is part of my worship. So if you went to dinner and somebody said, this is part of the sacrifice made to idols, and you took of it, you would be saying, yes, I partake of this worship to this idol. I partake of this meal with the intention of elevating this idol and participating in the worship thereof. So specifically what is being said when Paul is teaching these people these things is there is a goal in mind here for you to apply these principles towards, to protect the conscience of those who don't understand what it is you are doing. So he says meat is nothing, and idols are nothing. If you want to eat it, but don't do it in a way that's going to hurt somebody else. He says if you go to the store and you buy food at the market that's just sold in the stalls to anybody for any purpose, you don't have to check and make sure that didn't come from some unwholesome source. You don't have to confirm for yourself, oh no, this is definitely not idolatrous meat. It's just meat at that point. Because it wasn't sold to you with the purpose of being idolatry, and you're not eating it with the purpose of being idolatrous. It's just meat. But he says if you partake in the practice of eating that meat, you might as well be eating it in the presence of a demon and saying that the demon is your gracious host and you're happy to exalt and worship him, for the purposes of the person who is presenting the meat to you. That idolatry is wrong, and the partaking of it, even with somebody who knows that it doesn't mean anything, is not good, because the person who is giving it thinks there is a meaning. And it's for their conscience that we have to hold back. Paul wanted the Corinthians to know. Now, this isn't going to happen to us very often. I don't know about you, but I don't go to people's houses and they say, this is from the temple to Zeus. So, have some ham. Zeus liked pigs. That was the sacrifice that he gave to unimportant. But, if you happen to know somebody from the Caribbean and they, have slaughtered a chicken for a voodoo sort of ceremony, and they give you some of the chicken from it and let you know this, was specifically so Saint so-and-so would bless my crops this year, don't eat it. That's probably bad. But if all they do is say, hey, I made some jerk chicken, do you want a sandwich? Go for it, because as far as you know, that's just chicken. It's not something you need to worry about. So like I said, not a common occurrence, not totally impossible to come across, but the goal that we have in mind is to make sure that the person who we are interacting with understands that we're doing what we're doing from a clean conscience, and that they can have a clean conscience about what is going on as well. And all of those goals by themselves are complicated enough, right? We said that you have to be a veteran making this work. Newbies can say, all right, I know, just avoid idolatry, don't be idolatrous, don't do bad idolatrous things. And we know what the punishment is for transgressing against those commandments. But then Paul tightens the commandments just a little bit more. He just locks it down that much more by finishing out this chapter. Whether then you eat or drink, or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to Jews, to Greeks, or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. So no longer do we just have the process you have to go through to make sure that your conscience can be clean, and the person who's feeding you doesn't have to worry. But now we have the principles on which all of these actions are set. This is the foundation for every other thing that Paul has said in what we've just read above. This is the reason why Paul wanted them to behave the way he was instructing them to. This is the underlying principle, the deeper meaning behind the behaviors that we've practiced up to this point. This is the master chef level of understanding. This is the scholarly level of understanding. And we can all wrap our minds around this, and we can all become experts on this one particular topic. And I think it's possible in other parts of the spirituality as well. So I hope that by reading this again, we will get that in our minds. Whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. So Paul was saying that we had to worry about other people's conscience before, right? We had to worry about whether they would be offended or whether they would misunderstand what we were doing by partaking in this idolatry that they were presenting to us, maybe intentionally or unintentionally. We had to keep other people's conscience clean by our actions. But the reason why we were worried about that, the Christian conscience, is focused on a higher purpose. Our conscience is not set on whether we feel good about a situation or not, but whether or not God is glorified through the actions that we undertake. Whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense. And now this list is of the three types of people you can be. Jews or Greeks or Gentiles, however you like it, or to the church of God. So you're either a Christian, you're a Jewish person who has certain food rules, and these people who were Jewish Christians would have to abide by those when they were in their household, right? Because they followed the same restrictions. They came from the same culture, the same background, the same people, and they knew how to respect them properly. Or the Greeks, that is, the people who spoke Greek, that's the non-Jews. That's anybody that they would have been able to communicate with. The book was written in Greek. Greek just means everybody who's not Jewish at this point. Okay? Doesn't mean people from Greece. That's what I want you to understand. We're not talking about, some guy named Stephanopoulos who's from Athens. This is anybody who's not Jewish, all right, and not a Christian at this point. This is a situation in which we keep the hearts of other people in the forefront of our mind, not just because it's the right thing to do, not just to consider them and to make sure that they are being taken care of and so we can be kind to them, but rather so that they can have benefit through the glory that God, and so that we can glorify God at the same time. As Paul said there, I please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of many, so that they may be saved. Well, it seems like a big thing to ask Paul, to please all men in all things. That's kind of, well, what were we just talking about? The pleasing all men in all things is not that you go out of your way to give or to, treat people or offer a certain level of hospitality or make sure that you're, giving them gifts or treating them and all these other things and, all those material kind of things. What he's saying is that you want them to know that your attitude is focused on glorifying God, and because of that, you are going to consider their feelings and their view of the world and treat them in a way that God would have you to treat them. It's a lot less complicated when you put it that way. Paul wants you to please all people in all things by making sure that your behavior is not seeking my own profit, as he says, but the profit of men, so that they may be saved. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. The Christian's conscience, as we are looking at it, the one conscience that we all share, that is Jesus' word that guides our hearts, is that we are looking for other people to be saved. And by doing that, we find a lot of the other things easier to take on. Let's just back up to the beginning of what we were doing, right? Now, we're going to assume that you already have this principle in mind and you're already an expert, right? You get the idea that we're doing everything we do to glorify God, and the basis of our activity is to save people. So if we back up, if you got that, now when we say, okay, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. Well, what is profit? The salvation of many. So when we say all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable, we're considering our activities and whether or not, when we're doing them in front of other people, they help their souls be saved. So it's not a matter of what makes me comfortable, what makes me happy, what is good, but rather what I'm doing and presenting to people that I can do to help them and to save their souls. And so when we look back even further and we say, don't be idolatrous, don't act immorally, don't grumble, all of those things follow along that same principle. Because if we go out in front of our non-Christian friends and we're like, oh man, the song reading was so rough today. That preacher, he just talks too long, and all the prayers are so boring, and I'm getting tired of this Bible study I'm doing on my own. I don't know how many times a person can reread the Bible in their life and get new things out of it. If you're grumbling against God and against the kind of life you're trying to lead, you're not considering the profit of men. You're considering your own benefit. And so you're not acting on that principle that we talked about. And you're harming the conscience of the people that you're around. So even though we might not actually run into idolatry very much, because we're experts and we get the principle, we can apply this lesson in other places in our spiritual life. And I hope it will be beneficial for you to make that profitable change and make those actions in your life as we go forward through the rest of the week. And if there's anyone who hasn't joined with Jesus, doesn't know what it means to be one of his people, and is just new at all of this, we'd like to help you get started by being baptized today. And if you need prayers or anything considerations we can offer you, we'd like to invite you to come forward and take advantage of this time as we stand and sing.